welcome a great man, someone who I consider a very wise man, Richard Barrett, the founder of the Barrett Value Center and the president of the Academy for Advancement of Human Values. And one thing about Richard, he can't seem to stop. You cannot stop writing books because his soul keeps downloading great information. So today it's going to be about the evolutionary human, how Darwin got it wrong. So Richard, over to you.
Thanks, Stefan, and thanks for organizing this. It was a great idea. Here we go. Yeah, I'll see if I can stop about halfway through and see whether people have any questions. It's going to be in two parts. The first part is the idea and the theory of the evolutionary human and the algorithms of evolutionary intelligence. And the second part will apply this ideas into the stages of psychological development, and then we'll see how these algorithms play out in human development. So let's get started. So my purpose in writing this book was to challenge the two dominant theories, Neo-Darwinism and Intelligent Design, and what I wanted to do was to bring a third, more holistic theory based on what I'm calling evolutionary intelligence. And to explain what evolutionary intelligence is and how it operates, that's my second reason I wrote the book. And thirdly, to explore the implications of the theory of evolutionary intelligence on the possible futures for humanity. Now, I won't be covering that part in this presentation because we will only have time to look at the theory and its application to individuals. But in a longer session, and maybe we can do a part two later on, I can talk about how the algorithms of evolutionary intelligence impact national decision making. So my first point is basically evolution was never about species. It was always about consciousness. So my second point is that the continuance of this 3.8 billion years of evolution on Earth now rests on the shoulders of the evolution of human consciousness. So there's a hell of a responsibility we've got placed on human beings right now to continue the evolutionary process that's not just been going on 3.8 billion years, but it's been going on ever since over 13 billion years ago, because the algorithms of evolutionary intelligence actually apply to the whole of evolution, not to the evolution of just of life forms. Let's start with the question, what is consciousness? I've always defined, well, pretty much for a long time now, defined consciousness as awareness with a purpose. And I define it, I define it that in our three-dimensional material world, this is the definition of consciousness. So if you're existing in this three-dimensional material world, you will have awareness, and the awareness is always focused on a purpose, and the purpose in our material world is always to maintain internal stability and external equilibrium. And this applies to atoms that have to remain stable. If they don't, they will break up into the component parts. And so even atoms have an awareness. They're aware of their surroundings and they react or respond to their surroundings based on this awareness. And the same is true of cells, etc. And it's always the same, whether you're talking about an atom, a cell, a rhinoceros, a bird, human individual, a nation, any human group structure. The purpose is always to try to maintain internal stability and external equilibrium of that entity in its framework of existence. So right now, you know, here in Brexit, we've got a lot of instability going on in the United Kingdom, and we're trying to maintain internal stability, but it's got a little bit out of hand. And it's the same is true in quite a number of nations. So I just wanted to stress the importance of internal stability and external equilibrium. So being stable inside, like your body, for example, if you get sick, it's unstable. If you're well, there's a certain stability inside the body. Now your body is in an external environment, and so you have to maintain external equilibrium too. I mean, I don't want to walk down the street and get beaten up by the people who are walking down the street. So I somehow have to maintain external equilibrium, and I have to maintain internal stability. So if you can't do that, you'll struggle to function and will eventually disintegrate into your component parts. And that's exactly what happens when we die. You know, we struggle to, at the end of our life, we struggle to maintain internal cell stability, and eventually we're unable to do it. And the consciousness leaves and goes into the fourth dimensional energetic framework from whence it came. And the body then decomposes. What's holding the body together is the will of the soul to be present in three-dimensional material reality. So, as I said, this is true for everything. Everything's trying to seek internal stability and external equilibrium at the energetic level. And everything basically is energetic because, as we know from Einstein's lovely equation, E = mc squared, that the energy is the foundation of everything that we find in our physical world. So evolution's been always based on two types of adaptation: physical adaptation, which is what Darwin was very much focused on, and to a certain extent, he also conceded that there was mental adaptation too. So physical adaptation to our surroundings and mental adaptation into how we fit into our surroundings and how we relate to other, to our own species, other members of our species, and also to other species. So we've got the physical adaptation and mental adaptation. So as the frameworks of existence of a species expanded, they became more complex. So that required new mental, psychological capabilities were required to maintain internal stability and external equilibrium in an expanded framework of existence. So this fish, for example, does not have a highly complex framework of existence. And so its mental capabilities and psychological capabilities match its environment. Now here, this is a sea creature that which a much more expanded ability and to be able to deal with much more complex situations than the little fish. And here we've got another type of creature that is lives in a different world, and it has to maintain internal stability and external equilibrium in that world. And so you've got the giraffe, and as you see now, we're moving into more complex frameworks of existence. And as we do that, our mental and psychological capabilities to maintain internal stability and external equilibrium have to increase appropriately. So the stages of mind development, and that applies to anything in this world that is living entity, and even atoms, I believe, have a mind. Cells definitely have a mind. So the mental adaptation leads to what, in the human side, leads to psychological development, which leads to the evolution of consciousness. So mental adaptation, psychological development, evolution of consciousness. And the evolution of consciousness is actually about the ability to maintain internal stability and external equilibrium in increasingly expansive and inclusive frameworks of existence. So if we were to talk about spiral dynamics and say, you know, the people who live in different worldviews, I prefer to call it worldviews, so the different worldviews actually, as they evolve and grow, have increasingly complex frameworks of existence, and therefore we have to move up. The individuals have to move up their stages of psychological development. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So here are the 4 planes of being, which we can see represent evolution of consciousness here on planet Earth, or on our physical 3-dimensional material environment. The energetic plane, the atomic plane, the cellular plane, and the plane of creatures. So if you look into the second column, you'll see that there is a pattern of evolution. First of all, at the energetic level, an entity has to become viable and independent. Then it bonds with other entities to form a group structure, and that group structure then cooperates with other group structures. to create a higher order entity. And hence we get to the atom. And as atoms became viable independent, they then bonded together to form molecules, and then molecules cooperated to form complex molecules and cells, a higher order entity. And cells did the same thing. They first of all became viable independent. Then they adapted and learned how to bond to form organisms, and those organisms then learn how to cooperate to form creatures. And so here we are with Homo sapiens learning how to become viable independent. Then we're learning how to bond to form clans, tribes, states, and nations. And then those clans, tribes, states, and nations are learning how to cooperate to create regional and global groupings. So this three-part evolutionary process has taken place at every plane of being. I first wrote about this in my book, The New Leadership Paradigm, almost 8 or 9 years ago. And I downloaded this information even earlier than that, and I just didn't really know what to do with it. But now I see how it all fits together in these different planes of being, stages of evolution, and subplanes of being. So evolution progressed by each entity at each plane of being, creating a stable energetic platform which the next plane of being could develop. Now, we, human beings, are a perfect example of that, because at our energetic level, there has to be internal stability and external equilibrium. At the atomic level, we have to have internal stability and external equilibrium. And on that level is built the cellular level. And at that level, there must be internal stability and external equilibrium. And so our whole bodies are built around these stable platforms going all the way back to energy. And then, because if there is instability in our body at the energetic level, at the atomic level, or at the cellular level, we're going to get sick. And so we have to maintain internal stability all the way through. So how do we do that? Well, evolutionary intelligence. So this is a new idea. Evolutionary intelligence is the ability of an entity to adapt to changes in its environment so it can continue to thrive and prosper. Okay? That's what evolution is about. So how does this work? So whenever life conditions change and the internal stability and external equilibrium, threats to survival of an entity is threatened by a situation it hasn't experienced before, evolutionary intelligence clicks in to find a solution which involves mental adaptation. Okay, so what this is saying is quite interesting. If you haven't experienced this change in the environment before, then evolutionary intelligence clicks in. Now, if you have experienced it, well, you will have learned what to do. So here are the 3 algorithms of evolutionary intelligence. First, let's talk about any plane of being. You can talk about the atomic plane or the cellular plane. First of all, there's a base network. Individual entities learn how to become viable and independent in the framework of their existence. Then the algorithm 2 is when they get up against a situation which is threatening, which they can't handle by the first algorithm, becoming stronger and more independent, then they will bond together to form a higher order group structure which is more resilient. And then if threats continue, then they will cooperate with other group structures. So to form a higher order entity. So let me give you 1 or 2 examples. The United States is a perfect example. So there were people came over to the United States and they formed cities and towns. These cities and towns became viable independent. They bonded together to form colonies. And then when there was an external threat from the United Kingdom, they wanted to collect taxes and they didn't want to pay, then these group structures, these colonies, cooperated with each other to form a higher order entity to defeat the British. And they could have then gone back to their group structure, but they didn't. They decided to keep on cooperating and form the United States. So here is the same thing happened, same thing in the European Union. You see these 3 algorithms playing out all over the world at all planes of being. So how are these algorithms available. So the first algorithm, increasing individual resilience by becoming more viable and independent, is available to all entities at every plane of being. So, you know, that hummingbird we saw, the fish that we saw, any living creature, or even plants, even can increase their resilience by becoming stronger, by becoming more independent. Okay, and that works up to a point, but then when the conditions become too threatening, then they will bond together to form a group structure. Now, here is, you know, there are some creatures that are not able to do that. These are basically those creatures which have a reptilian mind brain but haven't really developed a limbic mind brain. For example, reptiles, crocodiles, etc., don't have a limbic mind brain, so they just have this reptilian mind brain. And so this algorithm 1 is really the domain of the basic mind structure, the reptilian mind brain. Whereas when we get to algorithm 2, we begin to see that some entities are able to bond at a particular brain. Some entities are not. That's algorithm 1. Then some entities, when things get too tough, they will bond to form a more resilient group structure. And it's available only to some entities at each plane of being. And then the third algorithm, cooperating to form a higher order group structure, is available to only one entity at each plane of being. There's only one entity at each plane of being that is capable of algorithm 3. So what is that entity? Let's look at it. Here we go. So if on the left we've got the bottom left-hand corner, we've got the carbon atom. The carbon atom is not only able to bond, it's able to cooperate to form complex molecules. Why? Because the carbon atom is the most stable, and it has it has the highest ability to bond more than any other type of atom. And at the cellular level, there's something called the eukaryotic cell, which has exactly the same properties. The prokaryotic cell, which came before the eukaryotic cell, couldn't do bonding and cooperating. So we see at the cellular level, there's only one, the eukaryotic cell, which is capable of bonding and cooperating. And in the form of creatures, well, there's only one creature, I believe, at the moment, which is capable of bonding and cooperating, and that's Homo sapiens. So here we have the arrow of evolution, and these are the three entities that whereby they show all three levels of evolutionary intelligence. So to continuously adapt, the mind of an entity must be able to do four things. And this applies to atoms, cells, nations, individuals. The entity must be able to sense changes in its environment. That's the first thing. So it must have a sensing system. It must be able to process the information coming in from the different senses. For example, the human has 5 senses, so it processes all the different information, the smell, the sound, the sight, the taste, etc. And it processes that information to build a picture of what is going on, what changes are occurring in its environment. So information gathering, information processing, and then it has to make meaning of that. So now we have a picture of what's going on. We compare that picture to the memories in the mind of the previous experiences that looked like this. Now, if the mind finds a previous experience that looks like the current experience, it will then look for a solution which it attempted in the past, which was successful. And therefore, it has to decide what to do. It must be able to choose a reaction or response to the changes that are occurring that allows it to maintain or regain its internal stability and external equilibrium. And most of us are doing this every day. And of course, what happens is when we come up against a situation we've never experienced before, we'll go to the first algorithm, try to become more stronger and to deal with this situation, which has never been experienced before by us. Secondly, we'll then try to bond in order to be more resilient, and then we'll try to cooperate to be more resilient. And that's basically what I was talking about in the formation of the United States and the European Union. So the trigger for this evolutionary intelligence is, well, the trigger for normal fear, is past experience. So I walk down the street, I gather information, I put it all together, and my mind says, oh my God, those 4 people on the other side of the road carrying huge sticks, I've experienced that before, I'm going into fear. So past experience allows us to generate fear, and that if we've had that experience before, we'll know what to do. The trigger for evolutionary fear is an inability to make meaning. Now that's very significant. So if I've never experienced a particular situation before, and I begin to feel threatened, and I don't have any memory of anything like this in the past, I can't make meaning of it. And the inability to make meaning is the source of trauma. It's the source of all of these difficulties that we have when we have to come up against something that we've never experienced before. And this is when evolutionary intelligence is triggered. So like a virus, for example, we keep on trying new drugs, and the viruses never experienced that particular drug before. So evolutionary intelligence clicks in because it can't make meaning, and evolutionary intelligence clicks in and it tries to find a solution, and gradually that virus can overcome the drug. And we're finding that the viruses is becoming increasingly difficult to manage certain viruses because they've got evolutionary intelligence which clicks in. They've never experienced something before, but then the evolutionary intelligence helps them to find a solution. That solution then becomes part of the maintenance coding of that particular virus. So once we've figured out what to do through evolutionary intelligence, we absorb that into our normal maintenance coding. So the next time we experience that, we know what to do. So this is basically what I just said. If an entity has experienced a similar situation previously, it chooses a reaction or response from its memory bank that is successful in storing internal stability or external equilibrium in the past. And I say chooses, this can be an instinctive reaction. Not necessarily choose it, but it's an instinctive reaction, particularly of those creatures who are operating at the reptilian mind-brain level. And even us, to a certain extent, there are certain changes. For example, we get a change in temperature. Our body knows what to do. The reptilian mind brain, the body mind knows what to do because it experienced this before, and we sweat or we do whatever, or we shiver, etc. So if it's a new situation, never experienced before, evolutionary intelligence clicks in. If the solution provided by evolutionary intelligence is successful, if it restores internal stability or external equilibrium, then the reaction or response is added to the entity's memory bank for use in the future. And that's how evolution has progressed. So, inability to make meaning triggers evolutionary fear. Evolutionary fear is equal to internal instability or external disequilibrium. Ongoing internal instability or external triggers evolutionary intelligence. So when we come across something that triggers fear, which we've never experienced before, we don't know how to respond, then evolutionary intelligence will click in. Now, evolutionary intelligence triggers basically mental adaptation, which leads to psychological development because we learn how to deal with this more complex situation. So psychological development takes place, and we have an evolution of consciousness. So the evolution of human consciousness, with the arrival of Homo sapiens, something significant happened. Mental adaptation continued, but physical adaptation stopped. So up to the point of, you look on the left, we've got cells, organisms, creatures, and then we get to humans. And up to that point, we had physical and mental adaptation. As soon as we got to humans, we only had mental adaptation. I don't see anybody walking around with 3 arms, 6 legs, or whatever, you know. We've moved into mental, which led to psychological development, which led to the evolution of human consciousness. Up to this point of humans, physical and mental adaptation happened at the same time. So this is why evolution of human consciousness is so fundamental, and it's linked to psychological development, which is built on mental adaptation. So what are the components of evolutionary human consciousness? An expansion of awareness. So we we become aware of a larger field of existence, which requires an increased complexity of thinking because it's a more complex environment, an expansion of intelligence, and an expansion of our sense of identity. So as we expand our sense of identity, we need to expand our intelligence, which means having more complex thinking, and we need to expand our awareness. So that's the first part. Now I'm going to now talk about how that links through to the human experience. So let's just stop and have some questions, if that's good, Stefan.
Yeah, it's perfect for people to ask questions now. Yeah. If you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself and please go ahead. Or you can also make a comment.
Richard, can I ask you something?
I believe you can, actually. I think that's what question time is about.
Oh, cool. You were speaking about, fear. You mentioned like a fear, and that many things are, fear-based. So do you see now US, do you see that Trump's way of nation leading, is also based on like a fear-based,
Okay.
Fear-based in terms of his, like, using his brain?
I'm going to stop you right there because I've anticipated your question, and I have a little section towards the end on what's happening with Mr. Trump.
All right. Okay, cool. That's what your webinar is for. Great.
Yeah. The whole webinar is to analyze Trump. So, anyone else? Any other questions?
Yeah. Hi. This is Anil. So, Richard, how does this play into the idea of individuation, where one
It's exactly the same. Exactly, you nailed it. You nailed it, Anil. Exactly what I'm going to illustrate with the reference to Donald Trump later.
Perfect.
You're absolutely right. It links right in. Because you could probably guess the answer. I'll give you a clue right now. If you're operating from the first three stages of development, or the first three levels of consciousness, it's all about ego and self-interest. When you get to the fourth stage, the individuating stage, then that's when you begin to consider bonding, and you become able to do that. And so that's when the second algorithm clicks in. But I'm not going to say any more now. I'm going to save it till later.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to move right along. And so some of you will be familiar with the 7 stages of psychological development, which are based on the 7 levels of consciousness. Some of you may not, but I'll go through it anyhow. So everybody on the planet, and I mean everybody, every human being is on a personal journey. And this is an evolutionary psychological journey. First of all, from the moment you are conceived up till after you're born, and the first 18 months to 2 years, you're in a surviving mode of development. Then, and that's when the reptilian mind brain is dominant. Then the limbic mind, or the emotional mind, becomes dominant around 18 months, 2 years, and we move into the conforming stage, which goes on till about the age of 8, when that limbic mind brain or emotional mind is dominant. And then we move into the differentiating stage, which goes on till around age of early 20s, when finally this is when the neocortex becomes dominant. But throughout this 3 periods, each mind brain is growing and developing as it, so by the time you're early 20s, you have a fully functioning brain, but up to that point you don't, and that is why teenagers do really stupid things, because they don't have a fully functioning rational brain or mind. Then we come to the individuating stage, which begins roughly in early 20s, goes through to the late 30s, and that's when we have the possibility of unlearning everything that we learn, so that we could fit into our environment and our culture to get our needs met. Suddenly, in modern humans, they leave home, they leave their community and they go off into a larger world, and they realize that everything that was true for them, or a lot of what was true for them up to the age of early 20s is no longer true, because they see the world, they see other people, and so they begin to change their beliefs and understand values. So up till about up to the Industrial Revolution, hardly anybody left their home, hardly anybody individuated, and even now in large parts of the world, individuation is really not an option for many people, particularly like in North Korea, where or the former USSR, where, and there are many countries where free thinking and through individuation is absolutely frowned upon, and you could get put up in prison for expressing a freedom of thought. And freedom of press is another one, where another area where it's not allowing individuation. So most of the planet, most of the people living in the world right now are still having difficulty individuating. And here's the link back to Trump. People vote for a president that reflects the level of consciousness they're at. Donald Trump hasn't individuated, and nor have all the people who voted for him. So now we move to the next stage, which is begins in the early 40s, and this is the self-actualizing stage. Now, the chances of individuating and self-actualizing are much higher if you are actually brought up by self-actualized parents, because they will not try to control you, or they will recognize that you need freedom to be who you are. And interestingly, I'm not going to talk about this today, but when you look at the different worldviews, the Scandinavians, which are the most advanced in terms of consciousness, all are nations that are basically operating at the individuating stage, and so there is a lot of freedom and equality. Now, the next stage, self-actualizing, I call that humanity awareness. There are no nations actually operating at that level, but I'm actually, together with several friends who are on this call, we've developed the humanity awareness movement, and we're looking at what would a nation look like if it was operating from this stage of collective development, and the stage of individual development is called self-actualizing. More about these, and then the integrating in the 50s, and then the serving in the 60s. So I'll go into detail now. So here's surviving. 0 to 2, which actually starts from the moment you're from about the 3rd month of pregnancy, when the reptilian mind brain forms. It's all about staying alive. Basically, staying alive is really, you won't find any explanation about staying alive in any scientific textbook, because nobody knows where it comes from. This need to stay alive, it's actually the soul's will to be present in our 3-dimensional material world. That's what staying alive is about. It's about getting our basic physiological needs met, and the need to manage your environment. So that little baby, 18 months, 15 months, it cries when it's upset, when it just doesn't have food, when it's got a wet bottom. And if those needs are met, that baby learns that it can control its environment, and it grows up normal. Now, when a baby doesn't get its needs met, it develops thoughts and beliefs that the world is not safe and can't be trusted. And later on, these people grow into adults who have to micromanage everything in their lives. And then we get to the conforming stage, 3 to 7. It's about keeping safe inside the relationship environment of in which you are brought up. And this means learning to be loved, because if you're not loved, you won't feel safe. And you need to feel a sense of acceptance and belonging. And if you don't get that, then you'll develop beliefs, fear-based beliefs, that you're not loved, that you're not accepted. And on the previous level, for the surviving stage, you'll develop fears of abandonment. So this is the second stage. And then we get to the differentiating stage, 8 to 24 roughly. And the motivation here is feeling secure. So now we're moving out of our home environment into a larger environment, the school, etc. And instead of feeling safe, we want to feel secure. And so this means being recognized by other people, and you need to feel part of a group. So you need to be seen, you need to be recognized, and be part of a group. Now, in the USA and some other countries, they have teenagers who go into schools and shoot up the classrooms and the kids and the teachers. And these are people who are at the differentiating stage, who never been recognized, don't feel part of a group, and are screaming out loud to be recognized. So when you don't get this happening, and this is when, basically, when suicide rates take off at this stage, roughly around the 16, 17 years of age. And this is all about not being recognized, not feeling part of a group. So then if we can get through there, maybe we can get to the individuating stage. And this is about releasing your fears that you learned about how to fit in, and the mask that you've been wearing in order to get your needs met. You can let go of that mask, and you become responsible and accountable for your life. But to do that, you need freedom and autonomy. And this is exactly, this individuating at the collective level is what's being created in the Nordic nations, where there are so many things in place to take care of you, so that you don't have fears about the first three stages. And so these nations, plus New Zealand and Switzerland, have managed to get to, at a collective level, to this individuating stage where there's freedom and autonomy. At this stage, in our 40s, it's all about self-expression. It's not about finding meaning and purpose. That's the ego's motivation. The soul's motivation is self-expression, becoming fully who you are, and a need for meaning and purpose. So I say ego is looking for meaning and purpose. Actually, soul is looking for self-expression. So I often say to people these days who are struggling to find meaning and purpose, I say, forget it. Just focus on your self-expression. That's all you have to do, because we're all souls having this human experience. So your soul knows what its meaning and purpose is. You just have to focus on the self-expression, and then you'll get there. So integrating is about connecting. The ego thinks it's about making a difference, but it's not, because you can't make a difference if you can't connect. And that's what the soul is about at this stage of development. And this is about unconditional loving relationships and empathy. So lastly, the last stage from a soul perspective is contributing, selfless service and compassion, and a desire to serve the greater good. So these last three stages from a soul perspective are self-expression, connection, and contribution. And that's what we need to be focusing on. So here you see on the left, the stages of psychological development. And now I link it through to evolutionary intelligence. You begin to see how it all fits together, because the first three stages are all about, that's ego development. It's up to the age of 22, 23, 25, is becoming viable, independent in your framework of existence. That's what humans are trying to do. And if you can't get past, become viable, independent, if you can't leave home and go off and find out who you are, you begin to get depressed. So, the leading cause of suicides, or leading risk of suicides in Wales, is amongst young women who are in their 25, 26, 27-year-olds, who are unable to leave home and become viable, independent, because there's no work for them. So they stay at home, they live off their parents, the parents give them money, they go down to the pub, they get drunk, and they're just trying to feel happy, but they can't become viable, independent. And that leads to, the leading cause of suicide in Wales is amongst these young women. So then, if we can get through these stages where we actually move at the individuating and self-actualizing stage into bonding to form group structures. You get married, you have children, and you learn how to bond, and you live in your community, and you have a team, you do teamwork in an organization. And then for the people who move on beyond the individuating, self-actualizing to integrating and serving, they learn how to cooperate to form a higher order group structures so they can be more effective in the world. So look at Donald Trump. I reviewed his values by reading his books. In 2010, I plotted his values from his books. And this is what I got. Here are his top 10 values, not in any particular order. They're in alphabetical, actually. And here they are on the 7 levels model. And the blue dots are positive values, and the the white dots are these limiting values. So he has a limiting value at the first 3 levels, which is ruthlessness at level 1, revenge at level 2, and image at level 3. These are not things that I made up. These are actually in his book. He has a whole chapter on ruthlessness in one of his leadership books. But notice a complete absence of values at the level 4, at the individuating stage. He's got 1 or 2 values higher up, but they're not absolute. I don't think they're really effective. Now, look at this. He's disciplined. That's a positive value. He's focused on winning, another positive value. But when you combine disciplined and winning with revenge and ruthlessness, my God, that's a toxic mix of values. You better not stand up against him, because he's disciplined, he's revengeful, he's ruthless, and he wants to win. So, wow, he's a tough cookie. These are all unmet needs from the first 3 stages of psychological development. He never got his survival, safety, and relationship needs met, or self-esteem needs met. And so Donald Trump never got past the individuating stage of development. So now we come to Anil's point. How does this relate? So we can only operate, if we don't move beyond the differentiating stage, we'll always operate from self-interest. If we can move through the 25, 13, and the individuating stage, we can then move into the common good, and we can move beyond individuating into self-actualizing and integrating. So there you have it again. I've repeated that slide so you can see. So people operating from the first 3 stages of development, just basically focused on themselves. We call it ego development. They become viable, independent. If they come up against something that's really difficult to deal with and threatening, they just try to get stronger. They don't know how to bond to form group structures, etc. So these are the stages that correspond. These stages, the ages that correspond to the stages, and people often challenge me on these. But all of the evidence that I've had over the past 5 years says these are the stages. Particularly millennials often say, well, actually, I'm into making a difference, which is like the integrating stage. And I say, well, yeah, but where is that making a difference coming from? Because most of the millennials who are making a difference are responding to issues of justice, fairness, or of achievement. Whereas true making a difference comes with the deep feeling of empathy. So that's an important difference. So once again, we have to get to the individuating stage, the freedom and autonomy, in order to bond to form group structure. And this is exactly what's happened in the Nordic nations. There is freedom and there is autonomy because they have a welfare state that takes care of everybody. And so everybody feels a sense of freedom and autonomy. And further that, for nearly 100 years, they developed something, a training program for young people, which would have a German name called Bildung. And again, that's not something I want to talk about right now, but if you want more information on that, read the book Nordic Secret. So basically, if you fears about basic needs, you will not be able to self-express. So if you have fears from the surviving level, they will show up when you get to the self-actualizing level. So if you can't, for example, I was at the World Bank. I realized I was totally bored with my career. I realized I had to go and do something completely different. Now, if I'd had any fears from the remaining over fears from the surviving level, I would never have done that. So you can be sure when you get to your 40s, if you've got any remaining fears about surviving, they will show up in your 40s. If you have fears about being loved and accepted, you will not be able to connect. So again, if you've got any remaining fears from that relationship level of conforming, not being able to connect, when you get to your 50s, integrating will be very difficult for you. This is a particular problem for men. Whereas the problem for women is at the earlier stage, the self-actualizing stage, because when you get to the 40s, a woman she may have a husband who she feels you need to take care of. She may have children she needs to take care of, and she may have aging parents she needs to take care of. And who comes last? Well, we know. And what the failure to self-express leads to breast cancer and problems of expression and certain gland problems in this upper area. But for men, who are told to be strong and not to show their feelings in that age 2 to 8, they learn that showing your feelings is a weakness. And so when it comes to integrating, where you have to connect, they can't do it. And so they actually finish up with prostate cancer. If you have fears about this self-worth, coming from the differentiating stage, and then you won't be able to contribute because you won't have confidence to go out into the world and contribute. And so this leads to issues of Alzheimer's, all sorts of issues to do with the brain, because each of these stages corresponds to a chakra system. So, summary: if your ego has fears about surviving, your soul will not be able to self-express. If your ego has fears about keeping safe, your soul will not be able to connect. And if your ego has fears about feeling secure, your soul will not be able to contribute. So a failure to master the ego stages of development results in mental and physical disorders at the soul stages of development. So that leads me to my book, this book, The Evolutionary Human. This is what people are saying about it, but it also leads to my book, A New Psychology of Human Wellbeing. So if you enjoyed this, you can find out more information at my new website, aahv.global. And just a couple of more points. If you're interested in learning how to live in soul consciousness, interested in trying to figure out what stage of development you're at, what's holding you back, then if you go to this AAHV website and you look under workshop, you'll see this workshop, which is available in Tuscany in May and in September, and we still have some places available in May. It's a 4-day experience, and with a lot of self-reflection and self-work. And if you go to this workshops and webinars on this academy, you'll find a lot of endorsements for this particular workshop. So furthermore, I'm happy to spend 20 minutes with you if you go to this link here, and where you can do a little assessment, and the data will be sent to me, and then I can give you some feedback on what stage of development you're at, and although it's quite obvious, but more importantly, what might be holding you back. Okay, so I think that's it, and we've just got 8 minutes for questions. Oh, I won't be doing that. We'll just get out there. Okay, question time. I need to stop sharing my screen. How do I do that?
You just go on the bottom, Richard, and stop sharing. Yeah.
Stop sharing. There we go.
Yeah. So if you want to ask a question or make a comment, just unmute yourself and please go.
So Richard, Anil again. How does this connect to pre-birth intentions?
To what?
Pre-birth intentions.
Yeah, so it depends what you mean by a pre-birth intention. Tell me what you believe that is, and then I'll try and respond.
In terms of if we connect to the karma and reincarnation, then we are carrying some certain essence.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure. Exactly. So here we are. We come into this world as souls in a human body, and I do believe we do have these pre-birth intentions, and a large part of those pre-birth intentions have to do with reducing karma, but also have to do with a sense of purpose and sense of mission, we call it. And so everybody is different. So when you move through the stages of psychological development, first of all, no matter what your pre-birth intentions are, you still have to learn how to become viable and independent in this framework of existence, and you still go through the first 3 stages of development. It's only when you get to the individuating stage that some of these pre-birth intentions come through really strongly. Some people may feel them earlier, they may have an impulse, but once you get to the individuating stage, they will come through much strongly, and particularly at the self-actualizing stage, because the 5th stage, the self-actualizing stage, the integrating stage, and the serving stage, the last 3 are all about taking on board these pre-birth intentions and living out whatever that purpose was. Now, that purpose might be, have karmic connections, or it may have connections to do with the gifts and talents that you bring into the world in order to, let's say, make a difference or make a contribution. I look at myself and I'm amazed at all of this stuff which I download. And I was told through an experience that, around 25 years ago, that I'm an architect of global transformation. That was the pre-birth intention, and I've watched that happen ever since. And I don't control what comes through me. Every book is like, I'm told what to write. I'm told what to put into the book. And clearly, this is my soul's pre-birth intention. There are other people on this call who have different pre-birth intentions, and these are showing up in their lives as gifts and talent and predispositions, which you can see early on, but really don't fully manifest until we get past, unless we're brought up by self-actualized parents, then actually they can manifest much earlier on. But if we go into the education system, which trains us to become, how shall I put it, homo economicus, to fit into the prevailing worldview, which is to make money, etc., and we learn about that, but we're not learning about our self-expression, we get off to a bad start. So we need to change the education system to focus on children about self-expression, connection, and contribution. Is that okay, Anil?
Thank you.
I think next is Heidi.
Hi, Richard. Yeah, I was just, I have now, just after that last answer that you just gave, my question might have changed. But the first one is that I'm coming to this with a Buddhist perspective. I've been practicing Buddhism for over 33 years. And I completely see how what you're saying fits in with the Buddhist belief system as well. But how do you think? What do you feel? What's the next step for people who are being enlightened, raising their consciousness state, if you like, to helping the rest of the world? How do you see that progressing?
The next step for everybody is to focus on their personal growth and to get. I mean, that's like common. If you're not doing the work, you're not contributing to the world, because actually there is only one consciousness. We're all individuated aspects of the universal energy field. So every time you make an improvement, it shifts the whole thing along a couple of notches. So that is brilliant. But the second point is, as you move into the evolution of your own consciousness, you will feel your soul expression coming through more strongly. And so therefore, you have to be ready to do whatever the soul impulses are telling you to do, so that you can actually make your contribution. So what you can do is keep focusing on yourself, because you'll be tested the whole way along. I mean, even when you get to the serving stage, you'll still be tested. I've been tested severely this last year, but also focus on your gifts and talents, what your soul wants to express in this world, what it wants to who it wants to connect with, and what it wants to contribute. So I hope that's an answer that helps you there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was just wondering if there's anything that you're particularly working on. If there's something as a group that we could potentially join with.
If you go to this the Humanity Aware, if you go to the aahv.global, and then look for Humanity Awareness, that is something that we just over a year ago, I pulled together 12 people from all over the world to talk about what would humanity awareness look like. So this is beyond people awareness. People awareness is at the individuating stage at a collective level, like the Nordic nations. Beyond there is humanity awareness. There are individuals living there, but there are no nations. And so my whole idea was, what would a nation look like if it was living from humanity awareness? So over a year or 15 months ago, 12 people met from all over the world near Oxford, and we began to sketch out what humanity awareness would look like. 3 months ago, we held a second meeting with 28 people from all over the world, and we went deeper. And so what you see on the AAHV website, the Academy website, under Humanity Awareness is where we've got to. Now, if you want to be part of that, which would be great, we're thinking of having Humanity Awareness Movement nodes in all different parts of the world. And we're just beginning to talk about that. In fact, we've got a meeting in, well, 1 minute to continue, to continue that discussion. So,
okay, great.
Go to Humanity Awareness on the AHV, and you can fill out your name and send me an email, and we'll get you included.
Okay, great.
Or just contact
Thank you.
Just contact me. My new email address is Barrett Values, BARRETT values @gmail.com.
Okay, great. Thank you, Richard.
So thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone. This was recorded, so we'll send you the recording as well as everyone that registered.